Hi, I'm Dan, this is That Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the BMW F900 GS. Except it's not, is it? That is an R1300 GS, and it's one with all the bells and whistles on it, including the automated shift assist, automatic gearbox. So why the confusion? Well, I'm not honestly sure, but I went along to pick up the F900, and for one reason or another, came back on this, which is, you know, a nice problem to have and quite the upgrade, but it does make this video a little bit tricky for the fact that I did all my preparation and research on the F900, and I've just had to kind of jump on this and make it up as I go along, which would be fine, but given that the 1300 GS is perhaps one of the most advanced and complicated motorbikes in the market today, well, it presents a bit of a challenge, doesn't it? Or, I don't know, maybe an opportunity, because the bike's been out long enough now that everybody's done their kind of deep dive reviews, they've scrutinised every last nut and bolt of its technology and its features and all that kind of thing, and just jumping on it and seeing if I can figure it out perhaps gives me a bit of a fresh take, or, you know, at least an opportunity to see if I can do that without riding into a tree trying to figure out which suspension setting I am on. Because that is, of course, the thing about technology, isn't it? When it works, it just makes things better and it gets on with it in the background and you don't really notice what it's doing. When it doesn't work, it's a complication for complication's sake. It can be a bit bewildering, a bit intimidating. So, BMW GS, are you a tech enabler or a tech overload? Well, I guess we're going to find out, aren't we? But first of all, the briefest of brief overviews. We do, of course, have an all-new 1300 boxer engine with 145 horsepower. We've got a new gearbox. We've got updated version of BMW's signature suspension system. We've got a brand new chassis and frame with lots of clever weight saving, which takes, I think, about 12 kilos out of the weight of the previous bike, and tons more stuff that I've so far completely failed to get my head around. The new GS range starts at just over 16 grand for the base R1300 GS, which literally nobody will buy because they'll all be happy to spend the 19 and a bit that you need for the TE version, which has the dynamic suspension adjustment, electronic damping, quick shifter, extra rider modes and all the good stuff that you really want on your new BMW. This particular bike, you need to find another £755 for the automated shift assist, and then a load more for the triple black pack and the wire wheels and loads of other stuff, I would imagine. What does that cost? I don't know, but it's going to be the wrong side of 20 grand and a lot of money, that's quite clear. One thing this bike does have, because I felt it when I got on it for the first time, is the adaptive vehicle ride height control, which costs another 500 quid, and as the name suggests, is able to raise and lower the bike, I think through a range of about 30 millimetres, and means that now pretty much anyone can flat foot a big BMW GS around at low speeds, which answers one of the criticisms I've made previously on the channel about these big, complex, heavy adventure bikes, that they can be somewhat intimidating for less experienced riders like myself, shorter riders, whoever. You know, people just find these big bikes somewhat difficult to handle at low speeds. That does seem to answer that problem. How does it work? I don't know, but it does have some cool other features as well, including one that I just discovered completely by accident when I went to put the bike on the centre stand for the first time, that being that it actually kicks the back wheel down and starts the process, so even a 75 kilo weakling like me can get the bike onto its centre stand first attempt, which is pretty cool as well. And there it is. That is my BMW R1300 GS review. Only it isn't really. Let's go for a ride. Right, so welcome to this BMW R1300 GS, and an opportunity to find out if I can get my head round the bike, whether I like it or not, and all that kind of thing. I should point out as well that this is the first time I've ridden a BMW GS, other than a very quick wobble on my friend's 1250. It's only the second BMW I've ridden full stop actually. The other one was the R1290, which is obviously a very different kind of bike. And I will admit, I'm coming to the GS with a level of preconceptions, prejudice even,
You know, I know people absolutely love them, swear by them, you know, they're one bike to do it all and all that kind of thing, but I'm a bit contrary by nature, and if people tell me something's good, I tend to kind of go the other way and kind of try and pick holes in it and try and be cool and say, nah, it's not all that. So if you combine that with the fact that I generally, although my riding taste is still developing, but I generally seem to like bikes that are lighter, simpler, all that kind of thing, and with round headlights, the fact that it's a GS, it's not simple, it's not light, and it definitely doesn't have a round headlight, then on the face of it, everything's counting against it as well. And then you get to the fact that this one has the automated shift assist as well, because as I've said before on the channel, I tend to like bikes with, or I tend to prefer shifting myself, even when there's a quick shifter fitted to the bike. So there's quite a few hurdles for this bike to clear if I'm going to fall for it. So let's get some miles and see what it's like. I'll start with that gearbox, which is, so it's an interesting technology. So unlike Honda, it's not a full DCT or automatic gearbox. It's a manual gearbox with automatic actuation. So it presents like a manual gearbox, it operates like a manual gearbox, it just takes over the actual shifting part. And I've got to say, it does it really well. For those who are kind of perhaps sceptical about automatic gearboxes on bikes, you still get that kind of clunk when you put it into gear, when you set off, so it still feels like a motorbike with a proper gearbox. You just don't have a clutch. And I'm going to put it into manual now. So, yeah, the only thing you're losing really is the clutch lever, which, given most people use quick shifters now anyway, there's no big deal. And then when you get out onto the roads like this and it gets a bit twisty and you want to shift yourself, you've still got a foot shifter like you always used to. It's just this time it's just a switch actuator. It's not actually connected to the gearbox at all. It's just a switch. But I think that's quite nice because it means that, let's face it, BMW knows its target audience, and most of the people coming to this bike will be experienced bikers and they will have grown up with manual shifters, so they will feel comfortable operating a gearbox with a foot peg. So unlike the similar system in the Yamaha, the YAMT I think it's called, which uses a kind of bar mounted toggle switch. So yeah, I think that's quite nice, and I've dialed into it a lot quicker than I expected. I think when you're riding a road like this and the fact that you can change the gears yourself, it doesn't actually feel that much different from riding a manual bike. You get the kind of sensations and the interaction that you probably want. And then when you're in town and stuff like that, the automatic bit seems to work really, really well. Downshift when you want it to. And it doesn't feel like any great hindrance. So yes, I'm more impressed than I expected to be with that. What about the rest of the bike? Well, suspension obviously on a BMW is very different from conventional bikes with that telelever and power lever system. Never mind all the complexities of the damping and all the rest of it. So it does have a different feel from conventional telescopic forks on bikes I've ridden previously. Now, bear with me here, but I would liken it to, you know those old carriages where like horse-drawn carriages, where the passenger compartment is kind of slung between the wheels on big long leather straps. It's kind of suspended between the wheels. I'm going to say that's kind of how you feel here, because you're kind of, the front and rear of the bike move differently than they do on a conventional bike, but when you combine that with the clever electronic damping on this one, it does have a very plush feel about it. The bike just moves as one. It doesn't move as a front end and a back end. You kind of, yeah, you're between the wheels, and you. As for how the clever suspension works, so the dynamic suspension are just very, very clever. I went to a BMW Tech Day where they explained it to us and completely failed to pay attention. So, but basically, it can actually adjust the spring rate, which is something that most suspension systems can't do. They can adjust damping, they can adjust preload, they can do things like that, but to actually adjust spring rate is something unique, I think, to BMW. It's certainly very clever, and that means the bike can adapt to riders of different sizes, different loads, whether you've got a pillion, whether you've got luggage, or that kind of thing. And it's doing all sorts of clever stuff in the background with the clever damping as well, with the electronic damping control, most of which you don't really notice, which is kind of a compliment really, because good suspension should work without you really realising what's going on. It does feel like you've got great support in the bike. I'm just riding it in road mode now because it's not a day for dynamic mode and stiffer suspension, is it? But it just works. It's really, really comfortable. It's really comfortable on the motorway. It's got great support on these kind of roads. One thing I do notice, which is a bit weird, is that you can feel the swing arm on your left heel, because it does stick out just a little bit. So you can feel the back end of the bike moving up and down through the corners, which is a little bit disconcerting at times, but I guess it's something you'll get used to. And as the road's opening out a bit, you can see, if not exactly chuckable, the GS can get a wriggle on, which is something I'd read in other reviews. People are saying that this new one is a lot sportier than the predecessor. I don't have anything to measure that by because I don't have experience of the previous one, but I think I was surprised, given how big the bike looks, just how chuckable it feels. And that's helped by the low seat height, which I think is 850 is standard. I think it drops down to 820 when the ride height thing does its thing, but it doesn't feel like a tall bike like the Multistrada Rally did, like the Africa Twin, things like that. It feels a lot lower and more manageable than I ever expected, so that's a pleasant surprise. I mean, sure, it's no sports bike that you're going to be flinging around the bends, but you know, if you want to ride a bit more dynamically, it feels like it's absolutely got that potential. Another thing I've been impressed by, because one of the things with a bike like this is tech, your interaction with all that technology, and that's a really important thing. You can have all the tech in the world, but if it's completely baffling and difficult to use, then it's pointless, isn't it? And certainly from the day job of testing cars, some of the UX I've come across in modern cars, it's absolutely terrible. It's so fiddly to use, so hard to get your head round, which, given you're supposed to be operating it when you've got your mind on more important tasks like driving, is perhaps a bit of an issue. So I've been pleasantly surprised at how easy the BMW Tech is and how As I say, I jumped on this bike with absolutely no prep. I hadn't even read the manual. I didn't know how any of the systems worked. But it's really good. There's like a hotkey button here where you can set up for the suspension or the cruise control distance or the adjustable screen, whichever your function you're going to be using a lot, you can just hotkey to that. The actual menus are pretty easy to use as well. So yeah, I'm very, very impressed by that. Particularly given that I'm coming to the bike cold with no idea how this bike worked, no particular sense of how BMWs work, because it's not a brand I'm particularly familiar with. So I think credit to the UX designers for coming up with a system of interacting with it which is very easy to get your head around. So, but what about the engine? Wow! That is, of course, the kind of heart and soul of any motorbike, and again, I don't have anything to compare this new 1300 Boxer against, but I really like it. It's got loads of character, it sounds good, got a real kind of throatiness to it. It's a big engine, that's for sure. But it's got character and it's got grunt. And it looks mad as well, you know, these huge cylinders sticking out by your legs, you know, that's genuinely something unique and very BMW. So it's all part of the experience of the bike, isn't it? So it's part of the look of the bike, it's part of the character, the way it rides, and it's got a real sort of creamy, torquey power delivery. 145 horsepower, it's not as much as a Multistrada or the Triumph Tiger 1200, but it's got charisma, it's got torque, and it's just, and it does go, it's not a slow bike by any stretch. So yes, my first go on a big GS, coming from the viewpoint of an admitted skeptic, and I've got to say, it is very, very impressive. A lot to get your head around, but yeah, I can see why people like them.
So there we go, I finally confronted my BMW GS prejudices, but what was it about these bikes that I thought I didn't like? Well, partly it's that thing, as I say, everybody else likes them, and maybe it's, you know, an attempt to be cool and edgy and say, yeah, I'm not fussed by that. Also that adventure bikes, as popular as they are, it's still, I don't think, my favourite format of bike. You know, I don't like necessarily the size or just the look of them, much as I don't like SUVs over in car world. I don't necessarily subscribe to that thing that bigger is always better. But I have to say, the GS has impressed me and won me over more than perhaps I did expect. I even quite like the look. I know BMW's styling is somewhat divisive, but there's a kind of brutalist, functional aesthetic about the bike, which is actually quite appealing, I think. So, you know, it shows you what the bike does. You look at the bike, you know how it works, what kind of character it's going to have just by its appearance. I think it's quite honest in that sense. So yeah, does it look cool? I'm not sure I go quite that far, but it does have a unique look about it, and I can understand why people like them from that perspective as well. In terms of the way it rides, I think the big question at the start of this was, is the tech on the bike an overload? Is it, you know, does it intrude on the riding experience, or does it make it better? I think, and you know, you have to defer to BMW's experience and the fact that this is such an important bike for it had to get it right, that overall the technology it does just make the riding experience better. The suspension is really clever, it's composed on the road, the ride height thing is really clever, it makes the bike feel much more manageable at lower speeds than many of its competitors, so that's really appealing. You know, I think pretty much anyone of any size could get on with a GS, and that's really impressive to say that it's such a big and imposing machine on the road and when you're just moving it around. So that's really, really impressive. Stuff like the radar cruise, you know, I'm instinctively a bit skeptical about entrusting myself to technology like that on the road, but it just works. The heated grips and the heated seat are lovely. The tech, the screen, the menus, the interaction with all that, again, it all just works. So it's really quite difficult to be snarky about the GS anymore, having spent some time on it. I'm still not sure it's a bike I would buy at this stage. You know, it does still feel like, you know, a peak midlife crisis motorcyclist stereotype. But, you know, maybe ask me in 10 years when I've got a bit more biking under my belt and I just want to enjoy the ride and, you know, sit back and enjoy the fact that the bike is looking after me. But yeah, it has really, really impressed me, and from kind of an unexpected upgrade or just jumping onto it and trying to figure it out, I think, yeah, I like it a lot more than I expected. So there we go, that is my review of the BMW R1300 GS. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit like. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so, and eventually I will bring you that video on the F900 GS and comparisons with the Vogue DS900X I've also been running, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching, and ride safe.